Hello, everybody. Thank you for watching The Naturalist Capitalist. I am your host, Reed Coverdale, and we've got a few guests on. We got my friend David Fite. How's it going, Dave?
Going good. Great to be back.
And we've got Jeremy Todd back on again. How you doing, Jeremy?
Hey, doing well, Reed. Thanks for having me again.
And then we've got the one and only, well, probably not the one and only. I'm sure there's like millions of Americans with this name, but the one important Dave. How's it going, Dave?
Very good. Good to be with you, fellas. That's yeah, my name does not lend itself to the one and only introduction. Like there's probably at least 50 people watching right now who are offended by you saying the one and only.
Well, I apologize to all the other Dave Smiths out there, but we've got the important one on right now. So there you go. Well, Dave, we're really glad to have you. This is cool. And, you know, a couple months ago, a lot of people wouldn't, I don't think the four of us would have really pictured this happening, but we had an interesting altercation on Twitter about a month and a half ago, and the four of us ended up collaborating after that. But just for those who don't know who you are, just give us a real quick introduction on what you do, just about your show and your activism you've been involved in for the last decade or so.
Sure. I don't know why I still hate that term activism. Like it just feels so pretentious to me, but not that it's inaccurate or anything, but I'm a stand-up comedian. I've been in the New York comedy scene for doing stand-up for almost 15 years now. And I'm a child of the Ron Paul revolution. And I became a libertarian. I mean, I was first introduced to the ideas in late 2007, 2008, but really in the next couple of years became a libertarian, started a podcast called Part of the Problem. And that's me. I'm a comedian and a libertarian and a political commentator.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the description to where you can go follow Dave on YouTube and everywhere else. I'll put him in there, so go check him out. So there's a lot of hatred in the libertarian movement, and it goes in a lot of different directions. And I think a lot of it exists just from preconceptions that people create about each other, and then they just don't talk. They just keep building those walls and creating boogeymen that don't necessarily exist. And that happened to an extent with the four of us, or really the three of us and Dave. So we just want to talk about what our misconceptions were, and then how we realized they weren't true, because there are a lot of people out there who are either in the place that we were and might think the way we did about Dave, and then there are a lot of people in the Mises caucus and fans of Dave who think that everybody who doesn't like Dave is like a closet leftist or like a losertarian or whatever. So I think this could be a productive conversation. So I'll go first. I started following you about a year ago, Dave, and I think out of the three of us, I was probably actually the least critical of you. But I, like you, Ron Paul got me interested in libertarianism, and then I wasn't working on Rand Paul's campaign, but I was very, very excited about it. And then it just, it was terrible. It was like I think you said in a text the other day, it was like the worst thing that's happened in the history of the world, just because it's so tragic, compared to what we were.
And just to be clear, I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that. It is literally the worst thing that's ever happened in the history of the world.
Yeah, it was so disappointing. So I found out about Gary Johnson after Rand Paul dropped out. And he had like 12% in the polls. So I was like, whoa, this could be a thing. And then he ended up on TV and he started talking more, and people found out more about him, and it just went down. And then Bill Weld was telling everyone to vote for Hillary Clinton. So I was kind of like, screw this Libertarian Party stuff. I'm just done. Like it's a joke. They don't want to win. And so I figured I was actually waiting for the next Republican who would be libertarian-ish, whoever that was, whether Rand Paul ran again. in 2024 or whatever. So I kind of became apolitical for a while. And then in 2019, I found out about Tulsi Gabbard and definitely disagreed with her on some issues, but she was anti-war, pro-civil liberties. She was for like immigration reform, tons of things that I agreed with. And the rest of the field was just terrible. I mean, everyone just sucked so much. And I lived in New Hampshire, so I met her, and I actually met David Fite too. We both worked on her campaign in New Hampshire. And you can ask David. David, I'm gonna ask you to back me up here. I was like the biggest pain in the ass when it came to the non-libertarian views during that campaign. Like I was.
Oh
I
yeah.
was,
There was definitely a little bit of there was a time between when you were just kind of there and actually started helping, where it was like a keep Reed away from people for like he's just gonna talk to her about guns. She needs to talk to other people. But
like I was
luckily it ended up well.
Yeah, I was like converting people on her staff to libertarianism. I was telling them why free college was a terrible idea. And then David and I took like a bunch of her supporters shooting and red pilled them on the Second Amendment or whatever. But anyway, we worked on that campaign, and it was also a colossal flop in New Hampshire, which was a year ago tonight, actually, February 11th. We were hoping for like third or fourth place, and she got like seventh place, nothing, compared to what we were hoping for. So that was a no-go. So then I was like, okay, I guess I'll take a look at this Libertarian Party stuff again. And that's actually when I found out about you. I think you went on Jimmy Dore's show. That was the first time I saw you. And then I was learning about Jacob Hornberger. So I watched his interview that you had on your show with Jacob. And I was like, okay, yeah, here we go. This guy sounds decent. He agrees with me on everything. And then Justin Amash got in the race. And I saw a different side of Jacob Hornberger that I hadn't seen before. Like he seemed really vicious and really closed-minded and really like rejecting of anything outside of completely pure libertarianism. You know, like if you didn't align with this really, really small interpretation of libertarianism, you had no area, you had like no place in the movement, was kind of the vibes I was getting from him. And it really turned me off to him. And that was the first thing I really knew about the Mises Caucus was Jacob Hornberger. And so then Justin Amash dropped out, and Joe Jorgensen ended up getting the nomination. So I had all these connections to all these Tulsi people from working on her campaign. So it's like, hey guys, if you care about ending the wars, care about overturning the Patriot Act, care about immigration reform, care about ending the war on drugs, like, hey, we got a candidate right here. So then everyone started looking at Joe Jorgensen from the Tulsi campaign. And then you had Joe Jorgensen on your show, and you kind of opened it up for her. You're like, hey, you can reach out to these Tulsi supporters. I was like, yes, here we go. And then she said, well, Tulsi was actually the worst candidate. She was really dangerous because people thought she was a libertarian. And, she was really a socialist. And then you guys were both saying like, oh yeah, she was really only good on one issue. She sucked on everything else, but hopefully they vote for you, I was like, oh man, this is going to suck now. Cause I had all these Tulsi supporters that got really, really angry at that. And, I obviously Tulsi's not a libertarian. She disagrees with us on a good chunk of the issues, but this outreach that I've been trying to do with the Tulsi supporters was just like completely severed after that interview. And so I tried for like a month to repair that bridge, and then I just gave up on it. I was like, all right, fuck it. Joe Jorgensen 2020, I'm just going in on this, full bore. Forget the Tulsi supporters. They're going to do whatever they want to do. And then the Black Lives Matter tweet thing happened. And then, you started attacking Joe Jorgensen. And so then I was just like, okay, what does the Mises Caucus want? Like, it seems like they don't want anyone to join the party. They don't want anyone to vote for anything. So I kind of like at that point became really turned off to the whole Mises Caucus. And, I voted for Joe Jorgensen. We did horribly, and it was just a disaster. So then after the collapse, we're all trying to like put the pieces back together. And at this point, I was sort of critical of you, sort of critical of the Mises Caucus, just because of how that whole thing went. But then the accusations that they were leveling against you were really unfair. Like they were saying, Dave's a Trump supporter, Dave's a closet Republican, Dave's a racist, Dave's a, you know, all these things. And I was like, no, he's not. What are you talking about? And so I actually started defending you quite a bit, even though I was still kind of critical of you. And then we had our altercation on Twitter like a month and a half ago, and I started watching more of your videos. And I actually realized we have the exact same messaging. Like I put a video out in December, I think it was called A New Libertarian Party. And I was saying we need to focus on like these 5 issues. And I think 4 of the issues were exactly the same as the video you put out that said taking over the Libertarian Party. And I was like, okay, we're not just on the same side. Like we have the same exact message for what's wrong with the Libertarian Party. So, you know, we've been collaborating the last couple months. We've been talking a lot. We've been in a lot of the same circles. And I don't have any issues anymore. Like I think it's been kind of cleared up. I mean, I think Joe Jorgensen was still the obvious choice given Trump or Biden. So I don't know. What are your reflections on that? What do you
Yeah.
think?
Okay. All right. So that's a lot. You just
Yeah.
threw a lot at me.
I know, I did.
But let me tell you, Reed, I love that. I just love everything that you just threw at me because there's something about whatever my personality type is, the fact that all of what you said just made no sense. And I don't mean this in like a condescending way. Like to me, it makes sense. But to the average person who's aware of politics, you're like, wait, what? How are you like, all you were for this and for that? And then you had this problem, but then you love that person. I just love that. I don't know. Do you guys know when Ayn Rand was trying to insult Rothbardian ANCAPs, and she said, you guys are basically a bunch of right-wing hippies? That was her insult. And I remember reading that and thinking, that sounds so awesome to me. Like, yes, that's exactly what I am. A right-wing hippie. Perfect. Thank you. And so there's just something about that I love. And so I don't know, there's a lot there. And to be completely honest, look, in the same way that I said that Rand Paul was a tragedy, that his campaign went the way it did, Tulsi Gabbard was a tragedy. Like I was rooting for her to have some huge impact. And it's such a tragedy that she wasn't able to be the obvious choice for the Democrats, or at least be what Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012 was, something that gnawed away at the Democrats, that was like, she does just make so many good points and we should be for her. Now, I looked back recently when someone showed me a clip of what Joe Jorgensen said about Tulsi Gabbard on my show. And I'll acknowledge I probably should have given a little bit more pushback on that. And I was in a little bit of a weird situation where I had been really hard, a hard advocate for Jacob Hornberger. He had lost. Tulsi had won, Joe Jorgensen had won. I was trying to be, gracious and give her the benefit of the doubt and be like, hey, this was Harry Brown's vice presidential running mate. I had her on my show. I felt like I almost had to carry the interview at points and try to be like, hey, let me get her over. She seems okay. She's pretty good on the issues. And when she went off on that thing, I was kind of like, yeah, no, you're right. Tulsi is really bad on a lot of these other issues, even though she's pretty good on the war issue. But someone recently sent me that video and I really didn't love how it went. So part of that might be on me. In terms of the stuff about like turning on Joe, it really wasn't just that tweet, although that tweet was god awful. And it really, that lives with that campaign, whether they like it or not. I mean, I saw the other day, James Lindsay. Do you guys know who he is? He's like one of the most famous Twitter anti-woke, anti-critical race theory guys. Got like a few 100,000 Twitter followers. And he tweeted out a thing just the other day. Might have been yesterday. And I don't even remember what the tweet was, but it was something like, he goes like, it's not enough to be passively not healthy. We must be actively anti-healthy. And when I was on a Tim Pool show recently, and I brought up the Libertarian Party, the first thing he said to me was, "What about that anti-racism?" And you know, this is like, it's become a meme. And so it's not, however you feel about that particular tweet or the campaign or anything else, you have to acknowledge that became the thing. Yeah, like, and that's on them. You have to understand what messaging is when you're running as a long shot, never gonna win third party candidate. Messaging is the whole game. And it wasn't just that one tweet. It was a series of tweets. It was a series of posts and messages and things she said in her speeches that I was like, this is, you're burying yourself. You're guaranteeing that this is going to be remembered as something that is not at all what we want to be talking about. And if you listen to my show throughout the Joe Spike campaign, what the point that I was making, like over and over again, was that you have this moment, like, look, man, our government went totalitarian. And I know I say this a lot, and I just want to make it clear. There is no other word to describe what the United States of America like became in 2020 other than totalitarian. I mean, you had a situation where regular American people are watching the TV every day to find out from their governors what they're allowed to do. Like, what can I go see my family? Can I leave my house? Can I go to the store? What hours can I go to the store? Can I go to work? Am I deemed essential or non-essential by the government? I mean, straight up totalitarianism. And in this same year, you have a Libertarian Party running a presidential campaign. And what's remembered from the campaign is that they said, you know, you just being not racist, that's not enough. You have to go out there and make sure that you're calling out everyone who is racist, which is like, it's precisely what's wrong with the modern left in America, is that you're not focusing on any issues that matter. You're out there ghost hunting about, like, is there a white person who has hate in their heart somewhere? We need to make sure we tackle that. And you're like, dude, none of that fucking matters. What matters is policies that are actually hurting people. And the obvious thing for the Libertarian presidential campaign to be about was that we are against the totalitarianism. And so it was just infuriating to me to watch this whole thing, that it was just so obvious that this was going to crumble and be a disaster. And I don't care about vote totals, just the fact that it wasn't going to lead to a movement, that it wasn't going to help what we all really care about. So I guess that's you know, the response to some of that. I know there was a lot of stuff that you said there, but that's kind of what comes to mind.
No, it was good.
I just got one question. Do you think that, because I agree with you on that tweet, when I saw it, I was like, yikes, I wouldn't have said that. But do you think that the reaction is what gave it its publicity, not the actual tweet? I almost felt like it was just kind of dumb, kind of a dumb thing to say. And then people
That almost got
talking about it, just like kept going and going. I was like, oh my God, you're giving this so much publicity.
Yeah, I felt the same way about Aleppo. Like, did we make this a thing by not shutting up about it, you know?
Yeah, right. So I understand your point. I actually think this was like far worse than Aleppo. Even because Aleppo, Gary Johnson was like set up. The problem with Aleppo wasn't even that Gary Johnson didn't get it. It was that Gary Johnson didn't know anything about it.
Right.
Okay, by the way, okay, can I tell you guys a real quick story?
Do it.
All right. So the day of Aleppo, the day that Gary Johnson said that on Morning Joe. So I was on Kennedy. Back then, Kennedy wasn't a live show. It was pre-recorded at like 2 p.m. So they send you, like, when you're on the show, they send you, like, you know, this is the topics we're going to be talking about. So the first topic, Gary Johnson, Aleppo, you know, because it's a libertarian show. And so I'm ready to go in there and just trash Gary Johnson for how he blew this opportunity. And I get there to the Fox News studios in Midtown Manhattan, and I go in there and I walk into the green room and Gary Johnson's sitting there.
Oh shit.
And I had no idea Gary Johnson was going to be on the show. Like, they just tell you who's on the panel with you. They don't tell you, you know, who else is on the show. But then when I see him, I'm like, okay, it dawns on me. Yeah, he's in New York. He just did Morning Joe. He just did this. So Gary Johnson's sitting on the couch and he just looks so defeated. Like, so defeated. And I come in, and I had met Gary Johnson like a couple times before that. Like, we knew each other. And we start talking, and I almost felt this like weird thing. Like, it's like, I know I'm going to go out and be tough on him when I'm on camera. And it's almost like if the four of us were talking right now and I'm going to go out and criticize one of you guys on camera, I wouldn't just want to be like nice to your face and then go criticize you. So I almost felt like this like obligation to like tell him, you know, like, hey man,
hey
this
dude,
is
you
where
fucked
fucked up. Because I'm about to go. You're going to be watching me. Like, you're sitting here. The TVs are all on and stuff. So you're going to see me as I go out there. So I start talking to him and I'm like, hey man, what happened this morning? And we start talking back and forth. I don't know exactly what happened. I think I blacked out in part of it, but cut to, I'm standing up and I'm screaming at Gary Johnson. And I don't know how I got there exactly, but like, I am yelling at Gary Johnson, and his people are around. Like, people are coming out from the makeup room. Like, it's like a scene there. And I'm screaming at him. And I'm like, dude, they brought up your issue. It's Syria. Obama armed ISIS. That's treason. This is a war we don't belong in. There are 50 talking points that you can hit here to knock this out of the park and change the dynamic of this election. Like, this is your opportunity. And by the way, you can still do it. It's still the same day. Go say this shit right now. And Gary Johnson is, I'm not kidding you. By the way, I kind of felt bad, but it was just one of those things, like the adrenaline. Like, once I'm yelling at him, I'm like, I can't stop now because I'm doing this and everyone's looking at me. And Gary Johnson is looking at his sneakers, like this, in a suit with sneakers, looking like a goddamn doofus. And he's looking at his sneakers and he's going, I know, I'm sorry I let you down. I know. And I just had this moment where I just stopped and I was like, this guy just isn't a leader. And I don't know. The fact that I'm yelling at you and you're apologizing to me, that's it. How the fuck are you going to let me? I'm some jerk off comedian. Like, what? You're running to be president of the United States of America. You're supposed to be the commander in chief of the military, and you're letting me yell at you about this. And once there was that moment, I just stopped and I realized you're just not built for this. You know, like, this just isn't. I almost feel bad for being so angry at you because I shouldn't have expected you to be able to be that leader. Sorry, that's an aside that just came into my mind.
Great story.
All this, but it's
phenomenal.
A pretty good story. So does the reaction to, I mean, look, I don't know. I'm sure to some degree you could argue that it doesn't help that people like me were so critical of her for that. And it wasn't just that. There's like, let's get real. There's like 7 or 8 different major messaging blunders that they had in this campaign. And not just that, it was also just major themes that they had in the campaign that I thought really, really were off and damaging. We can get into more of that. But look, if you go look at her appearance on Dave Rubin, go look in the comment section.
Yeah.
Everything is about that. Everything is about her siding with Black Lives Matter. If you go, again, the thing I said about Tim Pool or the thing I said about James Lindsay or any of these guys, no, that wasn't us that made them all feel that. The truth is that we were in the middle of a white hot culture war and she jumped in haphazardly, not understanding what she was getting involved in, and used the precise language of the radical woke left, which most of the left doesn't even like, and then just hashtagged Black Lives Matter. And so yeah, I'm sure you could argue that it didn't help, but the flip side to that, right? And this is why I felt like I had this obligation almost to go really hard at the campaign for all of that stuff. And I think you guys will find this in the next few years, right? Like, you guys are, like in many ways, I mean, I'm not like that much older than you guys. I'm like a decade older than I think most of you guys or whatever, but it's almost like over the next 10, like me from 10 years ago to now, and what you guys will find in the next 10 years is that it becomes a little bit different. You're not just like, oh, hey, I'm getting like followers now, and like, oh, I'm like a guy people are looking to. It gets to a point where you're like, well, now I have a responsibility in the liberty movement. I'm one of the voices, you know, and I'm not saying like I'm the guy, but I'm one of, you know, like the guys in this. And if everybody else is looking at the liberty movement and going, oh shit, so that's what you guys stand for? That's what liberty is all about, is that if someone's just passively not a racist person, that's not enough, and we have to fight this aggressive war about, does every single person have an impure thought in their head? I thought it was necessary for some people in this movement, some of the larger voices, to stand up and be like, hey, no, that's not actually what we're about. Actually, what we're about is like ending the wars, ending the Fed, ending the lockdowns, ending corporate welfare, ending like all these different policies. And you know what? If you're just not racist, that's more than enough. And even if you're a little bit racist or have some prejudices, don't ever fucking act on them or initiate violence, and you're also cool with me. Like that's, and so I felt like, yeah, you could make the argument. I don't know. It's a calculation. Maybe there were some negative effects to coming out against the campaign, but also maybe I was able, I can't tell you how much of my audience was like, I am so done with this whole movement. And I was like the guy being there like, no, this doesn't represent us. This is what does represent us. Stay together, stay in the party, stay in the movement. So I don't know. It's a calculation. Like, yeah, there's, you know, who knows?
Do you think that you had the obligation, but the rest of the horde jumping on it might have been more of what caused that negative reaction? You know, because I would agree that people like yourself do have an obligation to speak to what the liberty movement really is, but I think that, you know, most of what I think we're talking about here is also my criticism of the people that go after you. It's like, if all you talk about is like, this guy's a racist, this guy's a racist, this guy's a racist, this head of the libertarian movement is a racist, all of your followers now think like that's all they're seeing, that's all that they know about you. And I think that also kind of happened with Joe. It wasn't the people like yourself, or, you know, conversely, maybe like Nick Sarwark, you know, the people that might have quote unquote that obligation to field those arguments. You know, it's the horde just polluting people's timeline with it.
Right. Well, okay, so yeah, I mean, there's too much pollution on social media and stuff like that. I mean, you're not gonna get me to disagree with you on that. I mean, I think that's true, right, on all sides. But I don't think anybody who's just a libertarian or interested in libertarianism or anything like that has any obligation to what their loyalty to Joe Jorgensen is. I think the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian Party candidates have an obligation to convince people who care about liberty that they are that good that you should come support them. Now, to make the comparison between, you know, criticizing me for being racist or criticizing Joe Jorgensen for something she tweeted, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I'm limited by my perspective, but the obvious difference in that situation to me is that I'm not actually racist, and Joe Jorgensen did make that tweet. So one is kind of like something you're making up, and the other is a criticism of very real messaging. But if I were the nominee for president for the Libertarian Party, and I'm running to be the president, and I tweeted something about what I really don't like about black people or something like that, which I've never tweeted anyway, but if I did, yeah, that's like a completely legitimate thing to be pissed off at me about. And you should, and by the way, if Joe Jorgensen had just tweeted out all lives matter or something like that, I'd have been like, are you fucking crazy? Like, what are you doing? That doesn't just mean the statement, all lives matter. Like, are you unaware of what's happening around that? That is a counter to Black Lives Matter that is said by right-wingers. And if libertarians are going to enter the culture war, we need to have a different perspective, which we should have, by the way. We really
Agreed.
should have, because libertarians kind of have an answer here that no one else has, which is, if no one's noticed, our biggest opportunity right now. Like the biggest opportunity for the liberty movement right now is that we have, the country's spinning out of control. There is this huge culture war, and we're the only ones who can come in and say, hey, we have an option for a truce. It's not that we're on the left side of the culture war or the right side of the culture war. We can tell you why we should declare a truce and not fight this, because we're flirting with a civil war right now. And this is really dangerous. And this isn't good for the left or the right. And by the way, it's a toss up who would win. Because the left controls every institutional power, but the right has all of the guns, the cops, and the military. So neither side should feel super confident that they're going to be able to win this. And there will be bloodshed, there will be poverty, there will be unbelievable suffering if we really move into a hot civil war, okay? So what the libertarians can say is that the reason we're fighting this culture war is because the state has gotten so big that it is so consequential whether dumb Joe Biden or dumb Donald Trump get elected. But we don't need to fight over this. The fact that rural Alabama and downtown Brooklyn have drastically different cultures doesn't matter if you're not ruled over by one giant federal, national government that controls everything. So my point is just that, look, I'm not here trying to just tear down every libertarian. It's just that if you're going to be the messenger of libertarianism, you got to be good at messaging. And believe me, there are things that I don't like. There were things that Ron Paul said that I was like, shit, I wish he had said it this way instead of that way. And there were things that Murray Rothbard wrote that I'm like, I wish he had said it this way, or Hoppe, or like any of the great libertarians. Like there's things I wish, but I'm not sitting here spending all day trying to take them down, because they were so good on so many of the important issues that it's like, they're great, and like I'm not just trying to tear people down. But Joe Jorgensen and Spike Cohen, and I love Spike. I really do. I love him and I admire him, and I think there's so many great things about him. But their campaign, it's not like they made errors. They intentionally drove into a lane that was a terrible lane to drive into. That's my criticism.
Yeah, I just want to point out that I don't think you have an obligation to support the nominee, because a lot of people feel like if you're a libertarian that you have an obligation. I hate that. I mean, I was furious when Tulsi endorsed Biden, and that was her excuse. Oh, I said I was like, fuck that. So yeah, I had no way. I know
she's been great. Yeah. She's been great since leaving Congress. Like she's really been, she's had great messaging, but especially the fact that she left Congress after that. Like, why? Why would you kneecap yourself, especially when you're just going to go be a private citizen? Like, why would you kneecap yourself by supporting a war criminal? Not just supporting, endorsing a war criminal, sending your voters to go support them. And the other thing I'd mention is that it's not like this is literally what the former chair of the Libertarian Party said to me on my podcast, that we have an obligation to support the Libertarian nominee no matter who they are. And I pushed him on this in hypotheticals that essentially, I don't know if you guys saw the it
was Cheney, right?
Yeah. So I pushed him with Cheney, and I said, so if Dick Cheney runs, you're telling me we have an obligation to support him? And he goes, yes, I'm telling you, you have an obligation. And then, to push it even further, and all I was trying to do, if you look at it, it was just like, a technique for argumentation or discussion is it's an abducto ad absurdum that I said, okay, so what if Adolf Hitler runs as the LP nominee? And of course, what I expected was that he would just give me an obvious, well, obviously we're not going to support Hitler if he runs. And then I could make my argument, right? You use the extreme, and then you go, okay, so not Hitler, but why Dick Cheney? I mean, Dick Cheney instituted torture, slaughtered hundreds of thousands of people. So where do we take the level? And then ultimately I was going to go to Bill Weld and go, well, you know what? I think Bill Weld was a lobbyist for Raytheon and supported the Bush-Cheney foreign policy, and that's too far for me. but he knew I was going to go in that direction, so wouldn't give me that, like answer. So he just basically said, yeah, even if it's Hitler. Like he didn't exactly say that, but he wouldn't shoot me a no. He went, well, I don't know what world Adolf Hitler is going to run in. And I was like, yeah, but if he did. And he's like, well, Adolf Hitler's dead. And I was like, okay, but if he's alive. And he runs. And he wouldn't give me a no. So to me, like, that is like, well, then why are we even in the Libertarian Party?
Right.
I mean, if we're like, if we're just going to vote for whoever's up there, then why not join one of the parties that can win? I mean, this is like absurd.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Jeremy, why don't you go?
Yeah, no, I think Reed hit on a lot of points, and it really came, and I'll touch on two things. One, I want to follow up on that and what you just said with a question. So, because I've felt this way for a long time, is that libertarians should not be participating in the culture war at all, right? This is not our battle. We don't need to have an opinion on everything that the right and the left does if it doesn't involve us, right? And your message around, we can bring a truce to this war is the greatest thing I've heard. Like, retweet, amen, praise Jesus, right? Like, that was fire. Because I have been so frustrated at the whole right-left paradigm amongst libertarians. I'm like, that doesn't have shit to do with us. It doesn't have a thing to do with our belief system or structure. This entire culture war is nonsense. Why are we participating in it? Why do we have to have an opinion on the Capitol riots? Why do we have to have an opinion on what Black Lives Matter's messaging is? But to say that we should be the ones coming in and bringing the peace and the truce to it, that's a brand new perspective that I'm fired up about. All right, anyways, that's enough of that.
Well, can I just say before
please.
you get into that, I don't exactly agree. I don't think that we shouldn't have an opinion. I think we should have an opinion about all of these things. But I think that our opinion should be like it's not like if the left and the right are down here and they're in this culture war, our opinion should be from 10,000 miles above, wiser, and seeing over this whole thing and telling you what's going on here. So it's not that we shouldn't be criticizing anybody or that we shouldn't be making our comment. It's that we've got a whole different thing to understand about what's going on. And what is going on, like objectively, is that this whole culture war is not, number one, it's a result of the government getting so powerful, but number two, when the government gets that powerful, the corruption gets that out of control. And this is designed. Like, this is, have you seen those? I got, people shit on me because I shared it from like a bad source. So I went and shared it from just Nexus the other day. But have you seen like the charts about the number of mentions of racism, social justice, white, toxic masculinity, all these things? It's like after 2010, they shoot up. They shoot up. This is being pushed on people. They know what they're doing. They're throwing people off of the scent. If you go read this book, The Progressive Era by Murray Rothbard, which if nobody's read, you really, really, really should read this if you want to understand what's going on today, because so much of what we're living in today is the aftermath of the Progressive Era, which really happened about 100 years ago. And everything that we hate is a result of the Progressive Era. I mean, like from the Federal Reserve to the income tax, to the world wars, to the deep state, to the Great Society and the entitlement state, like all of this shit is a result of the progressives winning. And what Murray Rothbard argued, which is really a fascinating point, is that he argued that the Progressive Era was essentially a right-wing takeover of a left-wing cause. And that, and when I say right-wing, I don't mean anything good about the right wing. I mean like corporate power, okay? And that corporate power took over. Like there were these people, these like socialists who, misguided as they may be, really thought, hey, we need a managed economy so that we make sure that like the robber barons don't have everything and the little guy has nothing. Because, like we should probably make sure that that's, and basically all of these robber barons bought off the government to go, oh yeah, no, we'll totally give you a managed economy, but we're going to manage it. But absolutely, we'll push the income tax in the name of, let's take some money from the rich and give it to the poor. And by the way, that is exactly what's going on today with with all of this woke shit. It is, why do you think that JP Morgan Chase is pushing the woke shit? And right after Occupy Wall Street, like they had all these leftists out there screaming, we are the 99%. And then they're like, you know what really matters is microaggressions. That's like really what we should be focusing on, huh? And how about like transgender bathrooms and Black Lives Matter and JP Morgan Chase, we are so willing to send all of our white executives to diversity training. And the fact that the left can be bought off by this shit is insane. And the fact that the right then responds by hating the left so much because they're woke. Like I said this on my podcast the other day, if the left were better, they would go, JP Morgan Chase, fuck you. You're not going to convince me you're on my side for some diversity training. We care about the power imbalance. And if the right were better, they would go, aha, these lefties got fooled by this nonsense by JP Morgan Chase. But instead what's happened is the lefties bought into the woke shit and the right wingers go, look at this woke shit. This is going to kill all of us. And now they're fighting each other and Mr. Banker is laughing at all of them. So just to be clear, it's not that we shouldn't have an opinion. It's that we should have a better, wiser, more informed opinion than anyone else has.
Sorry, I agree. No. I totally agreed. I'm glad you brought that up to clarify, because that was we shouldn't have an opinion on this take was one that I had felt. But you had just convinced me otherwise with the, hey, no, we should have take, but kind of solve this culture war.
Yeah, I think part of what you said, Jeremy, though, still applies, because you were talking about like specific events. And I think that we definitely, there's times where if we don't know what the fuck happened, we get to keep our mouth shut. That's one advantage that we have, like the Capitol riot specifically. Like we didn't really know what happened for at least like 72 hours. We had no fucking clue. So why talk about it? We have the advantage.
Why does anybody have to put out a statement, right? Like, okay, clearly these people did a thing. Let's let the chips fall, right?
Exactly.
And that is something I hate when we get in the right left squabbles. I think what Dave said is right. It's because a right-left squabble is always going to force you to pick a side, and if you don't pick a side, you're going to be shoved into a side by the culture and the society, right? So sometimes saying less is more, but that's neither here nor there. So to go back, a lot of my original animosity towards Dave, and I was pretty outspoken about it, was a mirror of Reed, but for some different reasons. So like, as I was observing the Hornberger, Amash, Joe Jorgensen kind of deal, I agree with Reed that I kind of saw a side of Jacob, Hornberger, where I was like, man, what he's saying is correct, but God, he's just an asshole. Like, and then, that same perception came across about you, Dave. I was like, man, this guy's just kind of an asshole. Like, and that was what really, frustrated me. And I think we came to that resolution with, hey, that's just Twitter. Because honestly, I'd never listened to your podcast. I'd seen your tweets, and I was like, I had come to the conclusion, this guy's an asshole. And I think that is what really is the flaw, is that a lot of people who hate each other, we hate each other over one medium of 140 characters, and it just doesn't work. And so the whole Joe Jorgensen thing, it was confirmation bias. When you came at it as hard as you did, I was like, Black lives do matter. I'm anti-racist. It's not racist. That's what the words mean, right? I might have been a bit naive about participating in the culture war a little bit, but ultimately I was like, it's fine, whatever. It's not a huge deal. And to have you just explain the passionate fervor of, no, it's not that I'm trying to tear down these institutions. It's that I give such a shit about these institutions that to see somebody fall short it is impossible for me not to respond and react and be frustrated. That's the first time I've heard you say that, and it makes a ton of sense, because I feel the same way a lot of times. And I feel that same way about people who are fighting with each other on Twitter and not going together, right? I'm like, no, this is so much more important than the bullshit you're arguing over. Please.
And I want you to finish, but there's just a couple things I feel like I got to say about this. And I got to say, I feel kind of shitty about bringing this up, but I just think for the sake of like unity and us having this conversation, I do just want to make this clear. And I feel bad if I'm throwing Jacob Hornberger under the bus for this, but I really do admire Jacob for everything he did. And I'm a fan of Jacob Hornberger and will be forever. Okay, so I'm not like nothing bad about him, but just so you guys know, because I've heard other people who are kind of like, that's exactly what the Mises Caucus wants, just to fight with everybody. And if you guys had seen the private phone calls between like me and Scott Horton on the phone, not even on the phone, it was like on the computer like this, with everybody, like Skype sessions. I mean, we were screaming at Jacob Hornberger to cut it out and to stop fighting with everybody else, because we all thought that he had the nomination sewed up if he just didn't piss everybody else off. And in hindsight, I still kind of think that. And he fought these fights.
I agree. Yeah.
Yep.
He fought fights that were so stupid to get into. And again, he's a great guy. I'm not, I really don't want to say anything negative about the guy, but it was just bad tactics. And I don't know why he felt this thing that me and Scott really tried to argue him out of, that he felt like he had to show that he was a fighter and fighting for it, but he was fighting in all the wrong ways. And it was like going after Kokesh as if he was Bill Weld, like going after him for not being libertarian enough. Like all the things you could say about Kokesh, his problem is not that he's not libertarian enough. Like, you know what I mean? It was just, it just was insane. He's more libertarian than you, and that's the problem. That's kind of why we're with you, because no one will swallow his
cash.
So there was that. Now, in terms of the stuff of like me coming off like an asshole on Twitter, I mean, I get that. You're not completely wrong about it, but it's an interesting position that I'm in. And I definitely think, for sure, I haven't done everything right. And there's things that I regret. There's things that I regret going back over the last couple years. And I think for sure one of them is I should not have responded on Twitter as much to critics as I have. It's something I still struggle with. It's kind of fun. And it's just so easy, and it's just like always right there. And I don't know.
I was going to say, Dave, that's not in your past. That's a present.
That was today.
But I'll tell you, I'm better. I'm better than I was. Like
I agree.
Listen, even if you don't see it, like I am, I go out of my way to be less harsh, and I've tried, but it is a challenge. And I'll admit that part of that is just a personality flaw perhaps that I have. And it's like many personality traits with a lot of people, it's a double-edged sword. Like many times, as I'm sure all of you know, like personally with different people who you know in your lives, something that is their best quality is also their worst quality. It's like the thing that makes you is also the thing that breaks you. So the thing that people love about me is that like I am a fighter. And also that can be the thing that people hate about me. And that it's like, that's just kind of my personality is it's like, I'm very much that dude. Like if someone's like talking shit, it's like, okay, so what do you want to do about this? Like that's been me since the 4th grade. Like it's very hard for me, particularly in certain situations with the online stuff. And there's things I regret. Like I don't regret, debating people. So I do regret debating Archie Flower, but that's a whole other, aside thing. I really do. If I could go back, I wouldn't do that. I think that was wrong and I shouldn't have done it. But I don't regret how I've handled the situation since then, because it's almost like to me, there's like these situations where like, okay, so if you like, it's like if you're at a bar and some guy was like in your seat, or something like that. And you're like you're with your wife and you're like, oh, I'm going to go tell this guy he was in my seat. And she's like, no, just don't go tell him you're in his seat. And I go over and I'm like, hey buddy, you're in my seat. Why don't you get out of here? And then he turns around and he goes, yeah, your wife's a whore. And you're like, well, now I have to beat the shit
Well,
out of
yeah,
him.
now
Like,
it's on. Yeah.
now I could regret, maybe I shouldn't have gone up to this guy. Maybe I should have just let the seat thing go. But
Yeah.
now we're in this situation where my wife just heard him say that. Other people just heard him say that. And now it's like, so now I have to beat the shit out of this guy. And so this is not the perfect metaphor, but I never should have debated Archie Flower. I didn't realize that. I just kind of assumed, well, he's a state chair. I don't know. I guess that's good enough to like have a debate. In the middle of the debate, I realized I shouldn't be in this debate with him. This is not a fair fight. This isn't, I should have had one of my guys go take on him, not me. He wasn't ready for this, and he wasn't ready for the aftermath of that. And the truth is that I actually don't think he's the bad guy. I just think the way he's handled it since then has been really shitty. And then I feel like I'm forced for my people now to show them that I won't let someone do this to me just so you won't let someone do that to you. And the truth is like honestly, with a lot of these people, again, I know I am a dick in a lot of these situations, but just so people know, I'm like, I could be cool with a lot of these people. Like I love all of them. I'm mad at them because I love them so much. You know what I mean? Like I love libertarians. I love all of these guys. I don't, come on, man. I mean, if you're a libertarian, I love you. And how do you not love me? Like, I don't even, that's the thing that's so like bananas to me about all of this is that it's like, I'm not even saying like, oh, I should be like your favorite guy or I should be your leader or anything like that. But how would any of you hate me? Like look, I said this, I don't know if you guys ever saw when I had Chris Spangle on my show. But I made the joke about me being the libertarian Tupac, and then everyone started tweeting this at me, and we made a T-shirt about it and everything. But what I brought up this story where I don't know if you guys know the Tupac, he was shot like 5 times, and Tupac was not the one that killed him like earlier in his career. He was shot like 5 times, and he believed in his heart that no black person could hurt him because he was their representative. And so this black dude pulled a gun on him, and he walked over to him and grabbed the gun, and he goes, dude, I'm Tupac. You're not going to shoot me. Like, you don't want to kill me. I speak for you. And the dude shot him in the hand and then shot him 4 more times. And he said in this interview that he was laying on the ground, and he goes, I can't believe a black guy actually shot me. And that was the joke that I was making about like, that's how I feel about these libertarians who come after me. Like, I'm not saying I should be your favorite guy or you think I should be the leader, but I mean, come on, like I'm the guy who goes on Rogan and Tim Pool and Jimmy Dore and Fox News and CNN and goes and argues passionately that you're right. That you need to listen to the libertarians, and gives this passionate libertarian argument to all of them. So maybe you don't love me and I'm not your favorite, but you want to kill me? Like you want to take me out? Why would you want that? And so it's almost because I love them so much that when they try to take me out, I'm like this just makes me crazy. Like it, and it makes, and so I'm sure that in 280 characters, I'm coming off like a dick to those people. But it's like, to me, look, man, like I don't care. I'm not like, I don't care if you disagree with me on something. Who's debated more people who disagree with them on something than me? Like, honestly, like who, and not saying I'm at the biggest level. I have a million friends who are way bigger than me. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have that big of a following. I'm not that famous or anything like that. But who on my level debates more people on no level than I do? I'll debate like any of my critics. Okay, you disagree with me? Let's battle it out and see. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, like I've changed my mind before. I'll change it again. But the thing that drives me crazy is that when like you're trying to ruin me, like you're trying to take me out when I'm here representing you. Like, so that shit, and maybe it's a personality flaw, but that shit drives me crazy. Like, so that's where the dickishness comes out of me.
Well, when here's what's important, and I feel like gets lost in Twitter, is when you are able to, kind of tell that story and explain the things that you just said, it all kind of is like, oh shit, this makes sense now, right? Like it's not a lens that we're able to get across on a medium like Twitter. It's like, no, I'm only fighting you because I care about you. And that I always use kind of the teammate in high school example. If anybody played sports in high school, there was probably somebody on your team you fucking loved, right? But when you put the pads on, or that you stepped onto the court, whatever it was, they had your back, right? And I think that's the core of what we need to be focused on when it comes to liberty, is like, okay, look, we can have these discussions. And that was another thing that when you and I finally engaged, I was very impressed with, is that I was like, look, are you just hurling insults at Joe Jorgensen and Spike Cohen on Twitter? And you're like, no, I've had these conversations in private, and they decided to do nothing, right? So I appreciate and value somebody who's willing to have the tough conversations face to face or over the phone in private and address those. And that's, and you do the same thing, I suppose, with these debates. It's like, no, let's actually talk about them and have a conversation and engage and address.
Can I tell you? I'm sorry, please. I don't mean to keep cutting you off, but I think you're so on point. And so I just want to say this, right? And this is the weird thing, right? So all the people that I've fucking debated who were like my detractors, or critics in the LP. So like I had the Oxford style debate with Nick Sarwark. Then I had Sarwark on my podcast and we debated. I had the Fakertarians guy on my podcast and we debated. I had Chris Spangle on my podcast. We debated. I debated Andy Craig. I debated Archie Flower. Like, I've been in a lot of these. The person I respect the most out of all of them is Andy fucking Craig.
Yeah.
Like, I actually respect him because he showed up the most out of any of them. I don't love everything about him, but out of that group, but he showed up and he was like, you're a piece of shit. Yeah. And here's why I think you're a piece of shit. And like, okay, those weren't his exact words, but those were, if you listen to it, that's basically, and then you're kind of like, okay, hey, all right. That's what you think. You go, you're a piece of shit for X, Y, Z. And then we can argue that. And I can say, I don't think I am. And here's why, because of A, B, and C. And then let the people listening decide. Let people who listen decide who made the stronger case and what's what. And you know what? The same person Andy Craig was in that debate is the same person he is to me on Twitter. And I got to say, maybe it's my personality type. I kind of respect that. If I ran into Andy Craig at a bar tomorrow, I would go, Andy, what's your drink? I'm buying.
Hell yeah.
Come, let's fucking talk about this. Bring it in. I know we have our problems. Let's fucking talk. Like, I'd have no problem with that. With Archie and with the Fakertarians guy and with some of these other guys, it's like, they're nice. And we have these like I treat them with nothing but respect. And then they're online talking all of this shit. And to me, that's bitch shit. Like, that bothers me. That's not how men are supposed to behave, in my opinion. So that's to me what actually bothers me a lot more. Like, those guys, there need to be an apology before, a fucking drink was bought or something like that. Like, that's kind of just how my mentality is. But I do agree with you that, like, with the whole team sports thing, like, to me, my attitude was always like, let's battle it out. And then whoever wins, like, okay, or whatever. And then we'll figure it out from there. But I also do think there's a big difference between being like, look, the way I look at things, right? And I think that this is part of it's because I'm a product of the Ron Paul movement. And a lot of these people are a product of the Libertarian Party. And I don't mean to say this about everyone in the Libertarian Party, because I think overwhelmingly it's good people in the Libertarian Party. But a lot of people, a lot of different groups in the Libertarian Party are in it for a social club. And they're in it for this little thing where they have a little bit of status and they are a guy, and I'm this guy who ran for this office, or I'm this guy who worked on this campaign. And it's kind of this social club. But the Ron Paul people like me, we were in this for a revolution. Like, that's what drove us. I want real liberty in real people's lives. And I promise you, man, like, no matter who it is, it could be the person that I just, and I should say despise, because I don't despise any of these people, but whoever it would be, if somebody, if one of the Fakertarians guys, or if Archie Flower or one of these guys, if they got on a show with 10 million people and they broke down the war in Yemen and why it's such a humanitarian nightmare and why we need to end it and why Barack Obama and Donald Trump should be tried and executed against a wall for crimes against humanity, I would salute them. And I don't care if there were like a million other things that I hated about them. I would go, that was so awesome, because I care about the revolution. I care about this cause. And none of those guys, and this is what drives me crazy, is like none of them ever in their criticism of me, okay, you don't think I should have talked to Nick Fuentes? Fine. Like, okay, fine. You could disagree with me on that. You don't think I should have had someone on my podcast. You don't think I should have said the thing I said when I said it. But it's never like, hey, look, that was really great that Dave did that on Rogan. That was really great that Dave did that on Jimmy Kimmel. But I don't think he should have said that about, you know, Nick Fuentes or whatever. It's just like, fuck him. He's a racist. Like that. Right. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. That kind of shows it's like, oh, so you don't really care about this. If we listen to like half these people, who are we canceling? So we're obviously canceling me. We're obviously canceling Tom Woods. Eric July's got to be canceled too. Fucking, you know, Ron Paul's got to be canceled, right? Lou Rockwell, Hans Hermann Hoppe, they've all got to be canceled. Oh, I just checked Facebook today. Spike Cohen's got to be canceled too, I guess, because a meme was posted, right? Who's left? Yeah. Like, is anyone left? Is there anyone who spreads liberty effectively who these guys want to keep? Like, it's like, so you're not even interested in the movement. You're just interested in your status. And I got to say, this starts to make me question what your motives are. Yeah. Like, you know, are you just trying to maintain your status? Because I'll tell you right now, man, if someone else came out and was doing this like Ron Paul was doing this and was up, I would love that. I would love to be able to take a step back and just go, okay, that's the guy now. I would simp for whoever the guy was to go, who's going to go actually lead us to the promised land. Because honestly, I don't really think I'm the guy. I don't know who else is. Yeah, I think Tom Woods might be, but I don't really think he wants to be. So I don't know.
What you speak to is intentional blindness psychology. There was not to get too nerdy, but there was a study done where they asked a group of 200 participants to watch this video and count how many times a team passed a basketball for like 5 minutes, right? And they walked a dude in a monkey suit directly through the middle of all the basketball players. 46% of people never saw the dude in the monkey suit and requested that they show the video again to prove that an actual man in a monkey suit walked through. And it's because their focus was so much on that counting of the basketball throws. When you are seeking out something in somebody, and I was guilty of this, I found all of the asshole things that you did, and I never was able to give you credit for all the good shit you were doing. And so it took a moment to step back and look at the bigger picture and go, man, I can hate the opinion, but that's not enough to make me hate the person. And I heard you say that a lot in that, like, no, I don't hate these people. It's the fact that I care about these people, that their opinion matters. And so when they hate me, it hurts. Now, to flip that a little bit, I will say that is kind of the feeling we got when somebody like Joe or Spike was attacked, right? And it's not necessarily that we need to blindly go to these defense, but look, I didn't think Joe was the best candidate, right? Like, but I also see that we're on a 100-year mission as a liberty movement, but I'm also only 4 years into it. You're 15 into it. You've gone through the I'm gonna play nice, and now you're done with the bullshit, right? I'm still in my play nice phase. But it was one of the, like, I know that this is a century-long battle we're in to take back hearts and minds. This is the battle for our grandchildren, and that was the part that was frustrating for me. Was like, man, we're just trying to get 5%. Can we just play nice? But to hear you finally vocalize that, no, it's that I care this much, that this is about a revolution, and all of these people that I believed in let me down. Right. Well, as opposed to being somebody you didn't believe in.
Right. So it's possible. So I'll say this just very quickly, which is Gene Epstein, if you guys don't know who he is, but he's a brilliant economist and just a really great human being. one of my favorite people in the world. But he said this on my podcast that always really stuck with me, that, you know, just to not counter your 100-year battle argument, but just to point out that he goes, look, if you were sitting around as an abolitionist in 1845 and you were like, hey, in 20 years, slavery is going to be abolished throughout the West. People would have been like, yeah, okay, you're fucking nuts. Like, nice thought, but there's no way it's going to happen in 20 years.
Wow.
And if you were sitting around in 1978 and you said, you know, I think the Soviet Union is going to be gone in 13 years, or people would have said, you're fucking nuts. So you might be right. It might be a 100-year battle, but hey, there's a case for optimism and radical optimism. And especially with the way things are going, the growth of technology, the way things are spinning out, we don't know. So it might be a 100-year battle, but here's the truth, right? It is possible that I'm wrong and that the best strategic option would have been for me to go full throttle behind Jorgensen Cohen. And that is the best step in the battle going forward. In my estimation, it wasn't. You know, like, I have gotten to the place I'm at because I'm pretty good at knowing my audience, knowing how to inspire people, knowing, you know, like, keeping my finger on the pulse. I'm not one of these LP guys who only hangs out in libertarian circles. I'm a stand-up comic. I hang out in mostly left-wing circles. I'm a Jewish guy from Brooklyn. Like, that's my background. I'm not like some fucking, you know, whatever they may think of me. I'm not like some, you know, red state guy. I know my people. I know the liberty movement very well. I know what motivates them. And I think my calculation was that what the messaging of this campaign, and just to be very clear, it's not just the anti-racism Black Lives Matter tweet. It's getting on board with Black Lives Matter. It's Joe Jorgensen praising firing a woman for tweeting or Facebook posting all lives matter. It's Spike Cohen and the trans genocide post, which he did take back and then ultimately say someone else did and wasn't really his thing. But regardless, that was out there messaging during the campaign. It was like, it was many, many different things. And really primarily it was the not making the whole campaign about the lockdowns. That to me was it. All of that combined was like, I made the calculation that it was better for the long-term movement to let people know that this did not represent what libertarianism is. Yeah. I could be wrong about that, but that was my calculation.
I think it's a totally understandable thing to believe and voice and message. And that's the flaw of Twitter, is that you didn't have the opportunity, or it was ineffective as a medium for you to go, look, I hate this take, but I still love these people. Like, that I think is really the key for unity for us, is that we've got to say we can have these disagreements and still be on the same team working towards the same mission, right? And I think you've highlighted that a few times, right? And it's the greater that we can embrace that, the more effective that we're going to be. And that is, stop attacking the person, right? The person is not the problem. The person is on your team. It's we can discuss ideas. We can discuss differences. We can discuss opinions.
Yeah. And I'll be the first to admit that I'm flawed also. And some of the personal stuff does get involved. So there's no question that, like, it really, really bothered me that, that like what you were getting at before, that the stuff when not just me, but way better people than me, when we reached out behind closed doors, were like totally shut down. And that these people who run both Joe's social media and Spike's social media had this attitude that we don't know what the fuck we're talking about. I mean, they'll say it quite openly. Like the people who ran Spike's social media, when I would criticize them, they'd be like, yeah, I don't think Dave knows how to win a presidential campaign, or I don't think, yeah, Dave, this messaging isn't for you. It was so condescending and so shitty. And so, yeah, it did become personal for me too, when it was like, yeah, like maybe I do know a little bit about how
Yeah.
to message liberty. Like maybe it's worth, and by the way, they were wrong about everything. Like everything. I wasn't telling them to have some right-wing messaging or anything like that. I was saying, don't fucking post about a transgender genocide because that's stupid. And it makes everybody roll their eyes. And like, even if 26 transgender people were killed last year for being transgender, which they weren't, there just happened to be 26 transgender people murdered. Like most of them were just because, like, you know, a lover was pissed off at them. Like the reason most murders happen.
Most people get murdered.
Right. But to call it a genocide is like just bananas. And then to blame Trump for it being a genocide, it was like so bad. And there were so many. And I mean, things where like me and Scott Horton are telling Joe Jorgensen, hey, don't praise some woman being fired for posting all lives matter as an example of how the market works. Just don't use that as the example, because about 100% of the right and 80% of the left are terrified of Twitter mobs. And they don't believe in this. It's like a very unpopular thing. And maybe that lady was a jerk, or maybe not. And her life was ruined and she was publicly humiliated because she posted the wrong thing. And okay, like, feel however you feel about it. We shouldn't be celebrating that. And then not only does she say it again, but in her speech a week later, she goes, now, you know, a lot of people are telling me not to bring up this example, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. There was a woman who was fired, and that just shows you how great the market is at fire. And it was like these constant, like it was like insulting after a while.
And it's like a public subtweet.
Yeah, like exactly. And it was like, you really think you know better than us about this, and you don't. Like, I'm sorry, you're just wrong about it. So I'm flawed in the sense that I let some of that like get to me and be like, okay, well, if you're going to publicly subtweet us about this, then I'm going to publicly not subtweet you and be like, hey, I think this messaging sucks. Dude, there was at one point where and I might be giving up information I'm not even supposed to, but whatever. But Scott Horton, you know, was basically being ignored through the whole campaign. They wouldn't take any of his advice. And he told Joe at one point that that Yemen, he wanted to write an article about Yemen and put her name on it. And be like, look, this was by the end when it was obvious the campaign was failing on every level. And he was like, look, if we can do one thing,
right, Hail Mary.
Let's get this message about Yemen out there. And he had a connection at one of the biggest newspapers in the country. And he was like, they will publish this piece on Yemen if your name's on it. And he wrote the piece for her. It's like, here's the piece. It's written. Just put your name on it. And this will be what the campaign was about. Since you're obviously only going to get 1% anyway, just do this. And Joe came back to Scott Horton and told him, you know, I'm talking to my people and they tell me that Yemen isn't the biggest crisis, and that actually Syria is the biggest humanitarian crisis. And Scott Horton has to look at Joe Jorgensen and go, the war in Syria has been over for 3 years.
Jesus.
That's what we were dealing with this campaign. And so like it just takes, it's like, have some goddamn respect for who you're talking to right now. You're talking to Scott motherfucking Horton. Don't you tell him what the biggest humanitarian crisis is. He tells you. And you don't even know that the war in Syria has been over for years. So you're going to come back to him and tell him that shit? And like, it was that all the time. These are just a couple examples. It was over and over and over again. So like at a certain point, you're like, so I'm just supposed to play foot soldier? Like that's my role? When you won't take any of the shit. We're not trying to sabotage you. We're trying to help you because we care about the movement, you know? Like, and so again, like it was just, this stuff just drove me crazy. And then I have 280 characters on Twitter. So I come off like,
yeah, exactly.
David, why don't you jump in? You haven't had much to say yet. So.
Oh, okay. So one thing that I've noticed, not just in this conversation tonight, but just in general, as I talk to people, nobody that has a problem with you that I've spoken to started off having a problem with you. It's always one of your friends or someone you're associated with. both Reed and Jeremy mentioned Hornberger. For me, it was Maj Tory. And that was my first experience with the Macy's caucus back like mid 2019. And he went after me online for something out of like just some clear misinformation and moronicness, challenging me to do something that I had actually just done and gotten significantly higher percentage in a similar election in a more blue city. And that was his challenge. It was kind of funny. He was like, why don't you run for city council in a blue city? He was in Philly. I was in Brooklyn. I was like, okay, 3% versus what? Just did it. Same election as you, same day. Like, and then, there was a bunch of people in the Macy's caucus that stood up for him, including you. And I was like, okay, well, fuck you guys. And I, at that point in time, I kind of, I actually, right after that election, went to work for Tulsi Gabbard. Like a week after election day, I was in New Hampshire. So I was kind of like, let the Libertarian Party do their thing. I'm going to focus on this for right now. And so I just really didn't give a shit. Like, I kind of had a passive dislike for the Mises caucus, but like it really wasn't a big deal. Hornberger had that encounter with Amash, and I was like, okay, that just confirms my suspicions that they're like these obnoxious people. Still didn't really care that much because Jorgensen won, and like Hornberger kind of fell by the wayside quickly after I started paying attention to the Libertarian Party again. And then the interview with Jorgensen about Tulsi was again just like okay, they don't like leftist libertarians. That's what I kept hearing over and over again, was like the Mises caucus is like right wing unity type shit, and I'm obviously not for that, being someone that worked on Tulsi Gabbard's campaign and I live in Brooklyn. I work with Black Lives Matter and No New Jails and Decrim NY and a bunch of these like radical leftist movements in New York, because like a lot of the crazy right-wingers, I agree with them on 90% of the shit. Like, we have almost identical criminal justice reform policy. Like, and that's something that I think is huge, especially in New York City. Why we can focus on that. In Utah, probably, Reed, sex work decriminalization isn't that big of a deal. Maybe not for a national campaign. In Brooklyn, that's a big fucking issue right now. And we can unify with millions of people in this state on that issue. And so I just kind of saw like passive, like left libertarianism doesn't exist. And I never saw you say that. And so when people kind of roped you in on that, I started being a little defensive of you, and then actually followed you on Twitter and started reading some of your tweets. And I was like, okay, he's an asshole. And I think, no offense, that opinion still hasn't changed. Like, you're a comedian. Your job is to be a professional asshole. Like, you're good at it. It's amusing, and I kind of enjoy it now, but I still think you're kind of an asshole. That's just my opinion. But when people were calling you specifically a racist, or saying that you were attacking people, or that you were coming out and saying all these things, I kept asking people for the receipts, and I wasn't really getting much. They don't exist.
Well,
and then you reached out specifically, and that's when you messaged us and then made that YouTube video, kind of taking responsibility for the opinions that we kind of had for you, because Twitter sucks, and like, you're a professional comedian. Your job is to go on YouTube and like argue about things and debate people. So like, your job is to be kind of aggressive and annoying, and so your job was to do this, and that fostered kind of a false persona of hatred that you don't actually have. And
well, I mean, it's like any one of these labels. Like, I don't know, am I an asshole? I mean, certainly in some situations. I mean, if a state chair of a party says he's learned awful things about me that are so horrible, but he can't tell you what they are because he's building a private case, but go ahead and speculate about what the horrible things about me might be. Yeah, I'm going to be an asshole to that guy. Okay. If I say on a podcast when I had Christopher Cantwell on, who was a former libertarian turned alt-righter, and I go, look, dude, like, I'm sympathetic to you and the alt-right, and I think you guys are unfairly portrayed, but you're marching out there with people who have swastikas, and the Nazis, like, they're horrible. They slaughtered my family. It's like the worst movement in history. I can't be a part of this. And then someone takes a meme and puts a picture of me and Chris Cantwell and says, I'm sympathetic to you, and posts that meme out there. I mean, literally attempting career suicide, attempting career homicide, like literally trying. I mean, I understand they could say, we're not canceling anybody. It's like saying, I'm not shooting anybody, but I'll hand a gun to someone who I know will shoot you. Like, yeah, if you come in, this is how I feed my daughter. This isn't a joke to me, man. This is my life. Okay. So yeah, if you try to career assassinate me, I will certainly be an asshole to you.
Yeah.
That's who I am. Like, and I don't really see that as a negative quality, to be honest. But
I no longer do either.
Yeah. You know, how long did it take before you guys reached out to me and, you know, extended an olive branch before I was like, absolutely. Okay. Yes. Yeah. I'd love to talk to you guys. I'd love to be. So I don't know.
One time.
Like, am I an asshole? Like, I'm at, you know, I'm pretty, like, pretty good husband, father. I'm a good friend to all my friends. Like, I'll go to war for one of my friends. I'll walk through fucking traffic for the people I love. So, you know, again, it's not that you're completely wrong.
Let me clarify then.
No.
Twitter is you're an asshole on Twitter, like
yes,
most people
but
are.
To who?
Not in person.
I mean, but all I'm saying is just look at any of the interactions where I'm an asshole on Twitter and look at what I'm responding to and what they said. Now, I get it. I'm not saying none of it's my fault. Like, I'm sure a portion of it is. But the truth is that the accusations of like racism and stuff like that are just absolute bullshit. I mean, I don't know what to say. Like, I don't have to sit here and like write some post about how I condemn bigotry as irrational and repugnant or something, some of this like virtue signaling nonsense. You can look at what I care about and deduce from that where my values lie. And the fact is, when I go on Joe Rogan's show and I bring up the war in Yemen and how the people there are suffering, there is no personal benefit to me. There's no grifting angle to that. There's no fucking bump that you get for talking about that. I talk about that because I care about the fact that children are starving to death on the other side of the world. And I don't have to fucking, you know, like do this empty virtue signaling bullshit. And the truth is that in stuff, the biggest thing that I get criticism for is the people I've had on my fucking podcast and not being, you know, hysterical and furious at them and just having a conversation with them and even like finding areas where we have common ground. But from my perspective, for us libertarians, and by the way, this is true for Tulsi Gabbard too, for anybody who really knows the deal with the warfare state, that should be, in my opinion, an inoculation against so much of this bullshit. Yeah. So like, if you really know what the United States fucking military, along with the Saudis, is doing to the people in Yemen. If you know, I mean, what we did to Iraq is a goddamn genocide. I mean, literally my entire life has been a genocide against Iraq. Every president in my lifetime. I mean, well, did Reagan? Yeah, okay, Reagan just funded Saddam Hussein in a war and weaponized him to fight against Iran. 500,000 Iraqis died in that war that we pushed them into. George H.W. Bush started a war with them and then put the sanctions on. Clinton continued the sanctions. Probably another 500,000 people died in that time. George W. Bush, probably responsible for 1 million deaths. You know, Barack Obama kept bombing them. Trump kept bombing. Every president in my lifetime has killed people in Iraq. I consider that a genocide. Yemen is a goddamn genocide. Syria was definitely a genocide. Libya, maybe not a genocide, but we destroyed the country to the point that, you know, ruined millions of lives. So when you know that's happening, how does that not inoculate you to like when someone's like, but how mean are Trump's tweets? Like, yeah, what? I mean, like, what are we even talking about here? They'd be like, you talk to Nick Fuentes, a 21-year-old with views that are not good. Like, okay, yeah. He's not a libertarian. I wish he was more of a libertarian. Like, what? Okay. So it's just like all of this stuff to me is just like, so like, I don't even understand it.
Yeah.
It just doesn't even make sense to me. How could anybody even be concerned with this stuff? If you're really telling me we're concerned about like troubling associations, our party ran Bill Weld, a Raytheon lobbyist who supported Bush, Cheney, and specifically their foreign policies.
Yeah.
So
And
until we clear up that situation, don't talk to me about any associations or me being a dick on Twitter. I don't mean this is an attack on you, but I'm just saying like we got to have some priorities straight here.
Yeah.
Like,
and some perspective on those priorities.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
And that's why I kind of shut up about it. You know, like once, like I had just gotten dragged into like re-hating the Mises Caucus because, you know, things happened in New York State at like very low level, people that associate themselves with the caucus, not like much leadership. Heist got involved very briefly to the best of my knowledge, but I've tried to stay out of it to the best of my ability. You know, they did tank my run for the state committee and then ended up attempting to a second time and I won. But I got dragged into that, and very quickly you reached out and I was like, okay, so Dave's not part of this. Like we need to
maybe
make sure that we differentiate between people. And you know, you mentioned both Fuentes and Cantwell, and I think one of the biggest misnomers is that you do think that they're libertarians.
Oh, of course.
Or that you like them, or that you agree with them, and that's bullshit. Like you've never said that, but I've heard that millions of times.
No, what I said.
Everyone's just waiting for you to say exactly that, but you've said it before.
So this is what happened with the Fuentes one was he was on and he was on the show. And I was actually kind of taken back at first because I didn't know what he identified as. And he said he identifies as a paleo-conservative. And then we were supposed to debate. That was what the show was supposed to be. And then he was like, I'm a paleo-conservative. And I was like, oh, really? A paleo-conservative? Like, oh, dude, I fucking read everything Paul Gottfried ever wrote and Pat Buchanan ever wrote and like all these guys. And remember when they worked with Rothbard and these guys in the 90s and all this. And we just started talking about like right-wing history, which I'm really interested in. And then we debated a little bit. And at one point, I think I said at the beginning, I was like, you know, those guys were always like fellow travelers of the libertarians because they wanted to smash the empire. They wanted to smash the managerial state. They wanted to smash the welfare state and all these things. And so at one point I go, well, let me see, how much are we fellow travelers? Like, and I just asked him a series of questions. I was like, abolish the warfare state. And he was like, absolutely. And I was like, abolish the Fed. And he was like, absolutely. And I was like, abolish, whatever. I think the CIA. And he was like, absolutely. And like a couple other things. And he was like, absolutely. And I went, well, that's pretty damn good. And that's like their big smoking gun that I said, yeah, that's pretty good. I don't know what to say. If he had listed off a bunch of authoritarian policies, I would have been like, that's not good, obviously, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll say the thing where they're like, well, you were praising a Holocaust denier. And I'm like, well, okay. I wouldn't call that praising him. I mean, if you want to hear me praise someone, I will praise Scott Horton. I will praise Ron Paul. I will praise Tom Woods. I wasn't praising him. I said those opinions were pretty good, but he also didn't deny the Holocaust to me. The Holocaust actually came up, and I brought up how my family were slaughtered, and how the Nazis were terrible, and they killed millions of Jews. And he never at any point said, I don't think that's true. And if he had, I would have debated him on it, but he didn't. You know what I mean? So like, I don't know where, and then they point like to this video where he's like joking around, making like a Holocaust denial joke, but it's not exactly as if he's coming out and saying, hey, I don't believe that the Holocaust happened. And he certainly didn't say that to me. And if he had, I would have argued with him about that, but he didn't. And truthfully speaking, when people ask me, they're like, well, what do you think about Nick Fuentes or this or that? And I go, I don't know. I think he's like my baby brother's age. And I think that he's a talented guy and he's built up like a big following around him. And he's a very talented broadcaster. And I wish he was less authoritarian and more libertarian. We could use more talent on our side. I don't know.
Let's play a fun game just for this. How old is Fuentes?
I don't know. I think he's 22, 23, something like that. I don't know.
22. David, when you were 22, well, that was just 2 years ago, so this may not be too bad for you. When you were 22, what were your worst political positions?
My worst political positions 2 years ago. Honestly, by then
by the way, I'm going to
was
beat you all, and I'm going to
yeah.
beat Nick Fuentes. So
Yeah. 2 years ago, my worst political view was Bill Weld was a talented individual that helped the Libertarian Party get a lot of votes.
well said.
It's not
sir.
necessarily
Reed.
untrue, by the way. That's
Right.
true.
But by then, 2 years ago, I was working on the Larry Sharp campaign, so I was pretty woke by then to liberty.
Reed, what was your cringy 22-year-old take?
I don't know about a position, but I did, since Rand Paul dropped out, I ended up voting for John Kasich in New Hampshire just to try to oust Trump. That was probably my worst take of 2015 or 20.
That's pretty rough.
Yeah.
Wait for this one. When I was 22, I supported and have pictures with Roy Moore. Yeah. And I was deep. It was like a Huckabee Moore, let's go, Jesus. Jesus should run the federal government, right? Kind of
I wouldn't
deal.
be against Jesus running the federal government.
Right, Jesus would be great.
Exist,
right?
That'd be better.
Exactly, it would not exist. Jesus is not a socialist. But man, so I think that's really important. That
I just, by the way, love that
like,
David was making the atheist point and Jeremy was making the Christian point, but you both agreed that the federal government wouldn't exist if Jesus was running it.
That's right.
David was like, well, Jesus doesn't exist, so none of this is going to exist. And Jeremy was like, well, Jesus would abolish the federal government day one. So
absolutely. He overturned the tables in the temple, brother. So, I mean, here's the thing, is that I don't fault you for having a guy like Nick Fuentes on your show, because if we are not having conversations with people we disagree with, how are we ever going to influence them, right?
Yeah.
If we turn them away at the door, then there is, now look, I don't condone them coming and saying I'm a libertarian or I'm going to run for office or leadership, right? And there's this mindset. Exactly. There's this mindset out there that like we're going to taint the libertarian name by association. But look, if we don't let people in the door, we never have the opportunity to have a good conversation and bring them around ideas, right? So I don't fault you at all because did you go on Fuentes' show?
No, he came.
You should leverage the shit out of that, right?
Yeah.
Like,
well, look,
get on his show.
I would.
And persuade the hell out of his boss.
Dude, I would go on his show. I would have him back on my show. But here's to the point that I was trying to make before about like having your priorities in order and how really understanding like the warfare state should inoculate you against so much of this bullshit. For all the problematic associations that people give me shit for, you know which ones never come up, which really should come up? I worked for CNN for a year.
Oh, yeah.
I took money from Turner. I sat next to Essie Cupp and Brian Stelter and Max Boot. I did panels with Max Boot. I did panels with Bolton. Did panels with John Bolton. I sat next to these guys who are like advocating the genocides. And by the way, we argued when the genocides came up. I argued pretty hard against them. And when cops came up, I had some great moments there that I was really happy with that went viral, like where I was arguing to defund the police years before any of the Black Lives Matter thing was popping off or any of that. But there were other times when just other topics came up and we just had friendly conversations.
Yeah.
And I just talked to them, like they were people. Now, if you're a libertarian and you wanted to go after me for problematic associations, that would be the angle. And to be honest, I still to this day feel a little dirty about that. Like I don't know that I did the right thing. I took that CNN money and like that's kind of dirty. Like these are the guys, who promote the wars. But I justified it in my head at the time that I'll be the best guy on there and I'll have some of these moments and it'll be worth it. I think about that sometimes at night when I'm sleeping. Like I'm not sure I should have done that or not. I never think about whether I should have had Nick Fuentes on my podcast or not. Like that just does, like, I'll do that again tomorrow. If he wants to come talk again, let's talk. Like, I don't know that. So again, like all of this stuff to me. And then the argument that I get from a lot of people is like, well, he's bringing in those people to the Libertarian Party. But the truth is, anyone, if you listen to my show, like forget the Twitter shit, because on my show, if you listen to me, you know where I'm coming from.
Right.
Anyone who's listening to me and then following me and then coming into the party, because they're not doing that off a tweet. They're doing that off listening to my show and coming in where I have more listeners than I have Twitter followers anyway, but that's where I'm getting it in from. I didn't get my following from having Nick Fuentes on my show or from having Christopher Cantwell on my show. He had no following. Those were just people I wanted to talk to because I thought it was interesting. I got my following from, number one, the Legion of Skanks, a comedy podcast. I got it from being on Rogan 5 times. I got it from being on Jimmy Dore's show. I got it from being on CNN. I got it from being on Fox News. I got it from being on, like Tim Pool gave me a nice bump. So that's where I've got my following from. And any of those people who I'm bringing into the party are like, and okay, I'm not saying you can't find one person who I haven't brought in who's said some shit that we're all like, okay, that's stupid. Don't say that. But the idea that like I'm bringing the Nick Fuentes groypers into the Libertarian Party, like they're not even interested. Libertarians, wake up. They don't care. They think we're a joke, which, by the way, so do most libertarians.
Yeah, no kidding.
And that's something, if the LP wants to get serious, here's the thing they have to recognize, that most libertarians think the LP is a joke. And I think what I represent and what the Mises Caucus represents, in my opinion, is bringing the liberty movement into the Libertarian Party. And people, the truth is that the liberty movement was really built around the Ron Paul revolution. And the Ron Paul revolution does not have the same priorities that some of the woke social justice libertarians in the LP have. They're not like, oh my God, you once had a conversation with Pat Buchanan. They turn around and go, oh my God, you had a conversation with Bill Weld. How much worse Bill Weld is than Pat Buchanan. So I remember saying this, and I'm sorry, I won't rant too long on this, but I remember saying this on Thaddeus Russell's podcast once, where with Nick Gillespie, who, by the way, I love all the people. But before coming into the Libertarian Party, I got along with everyone in the Liberty movement. At Reason, at Cato, at Fox News, at Kennedy's show, at like all of them. Mises Institute, of course. I love all those guys. Tom Woods, Ron Paul, all of them. Done all their shows. Love all of them. Got along with everyone. But I said at one point where, Nick Gillespie brought up the fact that Rothbard had, in his words, praised David Duke, which, by the way, just like the rest of them, he didn't praise David Duke. If you go read the article, he didn't. What he said was that David Duke scared the bejesus out of the establishment. And why was that? And that's kind of interesting. And look at his actual program and look at his actual history. And they could say they hate him because he's a Klansman, but they love Robert Byrd. So it seems a little bit weird that they hate this Klansman, but like that Klansman. And it's actually a really brilliant piece if you go read it. But I go, okay, so let's say Murray Rothbard said some nice things about David Duke, which he didn't really, but okay, let's say he did. Nick Sarwark, who at the time was the chair of the party, he said some nice things about John McCain. Now, why am I, as a libertarian, supposed to pretend that David Duke is a worse person than John McCain? But just because the entire establishment that we're against are all unanimous that he's a worse person than John McCain? I don't like David Duke. I'm a goddamn Jew. You know what I mean? Like, I don't like David Duke, but John McCain, the guy's like, he's right now, next to Adolf Hitler and Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin. The guy's pure evil. And so why the hell do I have to pretend like libertarians? Like, I'm sorry, we have our own moral framework. We do not, like, we answer to a higher calling than CNN. And like, that's not. So like, no, I don't care if they say John McCain was a hero and David Duke's the devil. I say David Duke is a backward bigot and John McCain's the devil.
Yeah. So Dave, what I want to talk about, because we've been talking about it forever, but is about the Mises Caucus and about libertarian unity, because that's really what drew us all together on Twitter anyway. So I think I'm not the only one who is introduced to the Mises Caucus through Jacob Hornberger. And you brought up how you and Scott Horton were berating him during the campaign. Scott Horton actually shit on Jacob Hornberger when he was on my podcast. I don't know if anyone else caught that, but he was
Yeah,
talking,
I saw.
saying if getting rid of Medicare at the top of your priority is a stupid way to be an anarchist, then I'm in total agreement. And hearing you say the stuff you've said on your show, hearing him say that, hearing people from the Mises Caucus realize that is really encouraging, because I actually, when Justin Amash dropped out, I was actually campaigning against Jacob Hornberger, because I honestly would have rather had Vermin Supreme than Jacob Hornberger, because Jacob Hornberger to me was and by the way, Jacob, if you ever watch this, I'd love to have you on the show and talk with you. But he was like emblematic of that fuck poor people image that that everyone has of libertarians, and that's not what I'm hearing at all watching your show. That's not what I'm hearing from the Mises Caucus, and I think a lot of people aren't getting past that wall. They think the Mises Caucus wants to get rid of food stamps even if we can't pull out of Afghanistan, you know. So I think the key to libertarian unity and to bringing people into the movement is unifying on the important issues like ending the wars, ending corporate welfare, ending the war on drugs, a lot of stuff that you've been talking about on your show. So I just wanted people who watch me, who hear me saying that all the time, to hear you say it too. So just kind of give us what you think the Libertarian Party needs to do to be successful in the next few years.
And let me ask just to add on to Reed's, because I want you to expand on it too. You mentioned different priorities among these different sects within the Libertarian Party, and I think that comes from just what they experience as a human being and what they value. Not only what should be important, but how do we coalesce with all of those different priorities?
Well, I think so okay, so I think what has to happen is we have to come together on priorities, because if we don't, then the whole thing's a mess and there's nothing that binds us together. And I think that was really the brilliance of the Ron Paul campaign, is that Ron Paul spoke to the moment that he was in. And it was like, well, the priority was obviously ending the wars. The wars were raging on. And then the other priority that he really made was the Federal Reserve. And that may have seemed a little abstract and in theory to people like, who cares about the Fed? But Ron Paul got a fucking, 20,000 20-year-olds chanting "End the Fed." And the reason why that was so relevant was because we just had this huge bust. And he was explaining to people that the Fed is what causes the boom bust. And the Fed is also what finances this whole big government. This is how the whole thing works. This is the lifeblood of the Leviathan, right? Like, this is what you go after. And so I think that he was spot on about that. And I think that for us today, what we have to really attack is like the lockdowns, the government totalitarianism. I think that we have to attack the culture war from the perspective that we were talking about before, that we have the answer to call a truce and de-escalate this, because it's really tearing the country apart, and people know about that. And then the wars and the Fed, because they're both the worst things ever. And anything else about that, naked government authoritarianism that's ruining people's lives, the war on drugs, anything like that, like, of course, like, I think, should be a priority. But I completely agree with Reed, and the fact that Scott said that on your show is what's making me a little bit more free to say it on your show. And I really, like, as I said before, I'm a little bit torn on this because I want to be loyal and not like throw Jacob under the bus. But dude, just so you know, because I just think it's more important right now for the movement for me to tell the truth. And I mean, Scott stormed out of meetings, like a meeting, like just like this, not being recorded with like the four of us here, where Scott stormed out of the fucking room and wouldn't come back. And Scott like he was furious about the Medicare thing, and he was right, and I was too. I mean, I would never focus on, especially in an environment like this, like what's happened in the last, the last year, over the crumbs that poor people get.
Right.
I mean, yeah, I'd want to make an argument that, look, if you're relying on these crumbs, these crooks are always going to give more money to their friends than they give to you. But I not only do I not want to rail against that, I'm not even sure I would want to take that away immediately. I mean, like, these are desperate times. And if the government's put you out of work for a year, I'm not sure that they don't owe you something.
Right.
I mean, it's like, it's like, I think Bob Murphy made this comparison, but it's like, like we might be against eminent domain, or we are against eminent domain, but we're not against someone being compensated after eminent domain takes their home, right? Like, no, you have to compensate them if you're going to take their home away from them. So if you're going to shut down someone's business, then there's a libertarian argument even that they should get something. So I wouldn't even focus on that. I mean, I would just focus on like, end the wars, end the lockdowns, end the corporate welfare, and and then seriously talk about the financial system and how much they're screwing over the American people. I want an audit of the Federal Reserve in an attempt to ultimately end it. I want to end legal tender laws so that we can let cryptocurrency actually have a shot at this thing. I mean, like that's what I think we should be going after, and I think that's where my priorities would be.
Yeah, I totally agree. So the last thing I want to talk about is a lot of people are upset over the term of takeover, and I actually made a tweet the other day where I said I'm not scared of the Mises Caucus because they want to do all the same things I do. If they take over the government and leave me alone, that doesn't scare me. But if it does scare you for some reason, you should be trying to out recruit them. Where that doesn't seem to be the goal. It seems like the goal is, stop the Mises Caucus, tear down the Mises Caucus, delegitimize, defund the Mises Caucus. It's like, I don't see anyone saying defund the Prague Caucus or defund the Radical Caucus.
Yeah.
It's kind of all the attacks.
Well, we had a great fundraising day off of that tweet, so I appreciate it.
God, that
Keep
was
coming.
Beautiful.
Keep coming. Well, please, like these guys are really great fundraisers for us. I swear to God, there's some people think Archie Flower's working for me. Like I hired him to come out and these other guys. So I'd say, okay, here's my response to people who think the takeover rhetoric is like, divisive or something like that. So the slogan when they say libertarians plotting to take over the world so we can leave you alone. Do you think takeover is too strong of a term? How about plotting? I mean, that's pretty aggressive. Are we really plotting a takeover? When Ron Paul said he wanted a revolution, would someone have said like, revolution? I don't know. I mean, that's kind of associated with these left-wing causes or something. It's like, I feel like some people in the Libertarian Party are like goddamn allergic to inspiration.
Right.
I'm like, why do you think what do you think we mean by takeover? Do you think we're going to show up to the convention with AR-15s and like try to like take this thing by force? What do we mean? We mean that
maybe.
we're going, well, I'm not saying we won't. My point is that, but you know what we mean. We mean we're going to out-recruit you. We're going to push our candidates. But the truth is that what we stand for is the liberty movement. What we stand for is the Ron Paul revolution. What we stand for is not a choice between whether we're going to put a Bill Weld Raytheon lobbyist up to get more votes and fundraising, or we're going to put a Joe Jorgensen up who's just terrible at messaging and just kind of walks into all these things and can't conduct an interview once where you just go, oh, she killed it. And then there's these kind of like, social justice type people running the social media who are sending this messaging out that's just going to divide the base for no reason, for no benefit. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, no, what we're talking about is bringing in a hardcore libertarian philosophy that actually knows how to communicate with regular people, and that we have to be like clear on what our goals are here, man. And like the goals to me should be obvious to everybody, which is like, if you're in the Libertarian Party, here are the goals, okay? It's like, number one, we want every goddamn libertarian in America to be comfortable with the Libertarian Party. We want every single libertarian to say, I'm proud of the Libertarian Party. I'm like, it's not a joke. That's what represents me. I want to be there. Number two, we want to convince as many people as possible that libertarianism is the way to go, and make more libertarians, okay? Right. And then number three, short of the people that we can convince or convert or bring into libertarianism, we want to make them better. So we want to make this is why Tulsi Gabbard's campaign was so amazing, because no, she wasn't going to convert a bunch of Democrats to be libertarians, but she could maybe convince them to be anti-war. Huh?
She
Yeah,
did.
she
I,
did
I
make
have a
bunch of
lot of
Democrats
friends that
libertarian.
did.
Sure. Well, I'm
Yeah.
not saying she
Yeah.
wouldn't convince anyone. I mean, she's
Right.
not going, if she was trying to win the Democratic nomination, she wasn't going to make all of the Democrats libertarians, but she could make them anti-war. She could make them a lot better. And you know what? An anti-war Democrat party is way better than Joe Biden's Democrat party. And so that's what we want to do is what we want to bring as many people in as we can, not be a joke, be a force. And when people talk about the Libertarian Party or the Libertarian candidate, we want them to go, even if they're not a libertarian. We want a whole bunch of people to be inspired to be libertarians. And then we want a whole bunch more people to go, you know, they make a really great point on these three issues. Like they really say whatever you want to, man. They really make a good point about this. Oh, they really nailed that. That's an interesting way to think about this. You know, it's like, so to me, that's what the takeover represents. We got to all be honest here, right? We're sitting on the most beautiful, brilliant political philosophy ever devised by man that is irrefutable and sound. And it's not that it's a great philosophy because the philosophy is nice. It's a great philosophy because it actually works. Like it actually has the answers to so many of these problems in real people's lives. That's what we're sitting on. And we're viewed as a joke. Those are facts. Like that's no one can dispute any of what I just said. We are viewed as a joke and we're sitting on the most beautiful philosophy ever. If you don't think a takeover is needed, a shakeup is needed, when those are the facts, then I don't know what to tell you. And if it ruffles your feathers a little bit or it bothers you a little bit, okay. But let me tell you something. It also inspires a shit ton of people to want to be a part of that. And that's what I'm in this for. That's my job. My job isn't to worry about whether the fakertarians' feelings are hurt. You know what I mean? My job is to inspire like thousands of people to get on board with this message. So that's why I use it, and I will continue to.
Oh yeah, read those. This is breaking down. What do they call it? The fourth wall. Those are your 3 points for the preview right there. The three that Dave listed out, I wrote them down. Every libertarian comfortable with the party, convert as many people as you can, and move the people closer to liberty that aren't. That is the message. And that is the thing that I feel like doesn't get across in all of these Twitter arguments, right? Is that the reason we want to have these conversations are boom, boom, boom. Those 3 points.
Yep.
That's the end game. That you inspired the hell out of me, Dave.
Oh, good. I'm glad to. And I'll tell you honestly, that the 3 of you fucking inspire me, man. And like, I love that we got like young guys like you guys in the movement. And I really appreciate, you know, all 3 of you, like because I wasn't really the one who extended this olive branch. It was really you guys who did it. And I appreciate that too. And I, you know, when you're constantly battling with people, a lot of times you do have misconceptions, especially if someone's critical. It's very easy to be like, oh, so you're in that camp with all of those guys. And you guys inspired me to be much more like, okay, let me not, unless someone's like proven to me that they're, you know, in this kind of camp, like, let me give them the benefit of the doubt. So yeah. I appreciate you guys.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on, Dave. We appreciate you willing to do this. This is awesome. And everything you said on here, as far as what your vision for liberty going forward is, I certainly can't disagree with any of it. It's what's kept me away from joining the Libertarian Party until last year, and then the election was obvious. Every election that happened was disappointing, and I think everyone wants something that we can be excited about and push forward to victory. So,
all right. Well, thank you for having me. I'd love to do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.